Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what I painted this month for March 2017. Now, one particular miniature on the table right there clearly stands out. It's forced me to tilt the camera to an unusual angle to actually fit it into the shot along with all the others. But we're not going to look at that Stardrake first, we're going to look at some of the slightly more mundane paint jobs first of all. We're not actually going to have any close-ups of the zombies, because I don't think they're exciting enough. They are pretty much base coats of a very putrid green colour with a bit of bone mixed into it to make it even more pale, and then quick shade over the whole thing. So not very exciting to describe, and I've already talked about them at length probably numerous times. So first of all, we're going to look at these wraiths, which are the official Mantic wraith models, and I chose to paint them in a very, very simple style. This was for two reasons. One, I've already got some ghosts that I wanted to use in the units, which were painted the same way, and also I needed to get them done quickly because I bought them a week before a tournament when I wanted to actually make use of them. So we've got the purple unit first. They come in a box of 10, and a troop of wraiths is supposed to be 10, so I'm just going to have 5 of each colour, and then the additional ghost that I already have painted, which is on a bigger base, thrown into the unit to make them up to 10. The way these were painted was very, very simple. Purple, purple wash, dry brush purple, dry brush lighter purple, and dry brush white. And after I did the matte varnish, I actually dry brushed white again over that, because the anti-shine varnish does tend to kind of pick up very fine, almost dusty layers of paint when you apply it. So that very, very light corner dry brushing of the white, some of that was taken off, so I reapplied that after varnish. And then of course the basing is very simple, it's just sand and grass. My basing techniques have got a little bit more advanced than this now, but since I started the Undead Army in about 2012, I think, it was around about the time I got back into the hobby again, this was my attempt at advanced basing, because prior to that I'd only ever used green flock. The blue wraiths are pretty much the same story, except blue instead of purple, obviously, and that is how they look on the table. 2 units of wraiths from one box, but of course the metal Reaper ghosts in there as well. Next up, more Kings of War, because we've got some more additions to my Goblin army. We've got another regiment of trolls. Eventually I'd like to add a couple more and make them into another horde, so I could potentially run 3 hordes. But to make this one unique, because I didn't really vary the poses that much, I didn't do any converting of the arm positions like I've done with a lot of the others, I decided I was just going to add something different onto the base with them. So they've got a snotling, which is from Warhammer Quest, way back in the day. I had to take a very fine saw to cut the little base off his feet, so he wouldn't stick out too much from the snow. And with the above shot, you can see what I'm going for with the blood effects there. I'm trying to make it look like the weapons were being held in a certain position and dripping, and then they were slowly moved into another position and continued to drip as they were moved. And this final image is a good illustration of how I paint the skin, because the trolls and the snotling both started off with the same shade of green. It's very, very, very bright, and then I just apply multiple layers of Agrex Earthshade over it. So the snotling only has 2 layers of Agrex Earthshade on him, and the trolls have 5. So after 2 layers, the way the snotling looks there is how the trolls look. And I just keep going to 4 layers, and then after the 4th one, that's when I'll paint in all the details like teeth, and then the 5th layer will go over those as well. I think he adds a little bit of unique character to the unit there, and perhaps I'll add a slightly later snotling to another base at some point, because I do have a couple of those knocking around somewhere in a box. The orange, as usual with the goblins, is just a straight application of orange, and then Reikland flesh shade over the top of it, which dulls it down a little bit so it's not quite so insanely bright, because it stands out enough as it is on that snow. Next we have the main event, and that is of course the Stardrake, which took me a few weeks to get around to painting, because first of all I was waiting for glue to arrive, and then after that I was waiting for the weather conditions to be perfect so I could actually spray it black outside, because I'm fed up of using airbrush primers, as you may have heard me ranting about in the past. But once it was all black, the first thing I did was airbrush the wings. So I used paper to cover up most of the rest of the model, so I wouldn't have to paint it all black again. And some of the pieces weren't actually attached. The armour plates over the front legs and the saddle, if you will, and the rider were not attached at this point. So I tried to airbrush a bit of a gradient onto the wings, but it wasn't very strong. But later on I did something else to enhance that. But we'll get to that. Trying to go in order here. So after I airbrushed the wings purple with a very subtle gradient in there by slowly lightening it as it got closer to the tip, what I did next was any parts that had accidentally been sprayed purple, I went over those in black again, just with a brush, and then I dry brushed all the scales on the upper part of the creature and the head. That was done first of all with a dark purple, then with a lighter purple, and the dry brush is getting progressively lighter as it goes, and then with a white dry brush, which is only just going over all the edges, not too heavy at all. So there's very few points where you can actually point to it and say, yes, that's definitely white, so hopefully it's quite subtle. And then after all the scales were done, I painted all of the underside and the legs in white, with the intention of then putting a wash or a glaze over that. And at that point I then thinned down a purple wash, which was Druchii Violet. I thinned that down with Lamian Medium in a 50-50 mix, and then applied 2 coats of that to most of the area. There were certain parts where the colour stayed a bit stronger than others, so anywhere where it kind of ran away, I applied another coat, just to make sure it was looking quite even across the whole thing. I actually intended to go in and paint each individual underscale in white, but I tried it on a couple in a place that wouldn't show where an armour plate was going to go, and I didn't really like the look of it, so I decided I was just going to leave it that kind of purpley pinkish colour on the underside. I think it looks quite tasty. Then after that, I believe I did all the horns and the teeth and the tongue and the claws. So lots of bone colour there. For the horns, I put a bit of wash near the base of the horn, and then dry brushed over it in the bone colour again, and then that was focused mainly on the sharp edges of the horns, and then I actually applied a very thin line of watered down bone colour onto the claws after I'd put a wash onto those as well. The teeth didn't have any additional highlights on them, but I did use a wash on them, and if I felt it was too heavy then I would draw a lot of it away, so there's probably a little bit of colour variation in them. The tongue, I just painted the entire inside of the mouth in red, and then put a red wash in there, which is heavier on the base and roof of the mouth and not so much on the tongue. Before I even got to the actual beast itself, I'd already finished painting the rider, and he was done the same way I've done all my Stormcast, which is gold, Reikland Flesh Shade, gold again, and then a gold highlight with a much, much lighter gold. I actually painted the gold on the Stardrake slightly differently than the rider, because I couldn't really spray the gold on, because that would have messed up the other pieces. So I actually applied that by hand. I actually bought the same shade of gold that I used to spray, but in regular paint form. It's actually Glorious Gold by Vallejo. So I've got the Air version and also the Game Colour version. Nothing particularly fancy about the base, it's just black, dry brushed with grey, then dry brushed with white, with some grass tufts and static grass applied to match the rest of my Stormcast army. Maybe the only thing I didn't mention was the edge highlighting on the black, which was done with grey and then a lighter grey on the sharp corners. Ah yes, one thing which I said I would get to, the wings. So the gradient wasn't strong enough, so what I did was I used the same mix of Druchii Violet and Lamian Medium that I used on the underside of it, and I applied that to the wings as well. But I did it gradually, so I started about 3/4 of the way up the wing and did one layer, then I moved a little bit down and did another layer, leaving plenty of time for them to dry in between, then moved a little bit further and did the same and a little bit further, so it gets darker and darker the more you get towards the front of the creature, and I think it looks very effective. When you see it directly from the top, you can kind of see the lines of where it transitions from one layer of wash to the other, but in general I think it looks fairly smoothish for my first attempt doing that kind of thing, and I think on the table it looks very, very tasty. If I've got anything else, let me know, and I'll go into more detail in the comments if need be. So, quite an impressive batch of miniatures there, I think, mainly thanks to the Stardrake, but I think the rest of it looks pretty tasty as well, and significant work done in the month of March. In April, what's going to be done? Well, that depends. If GW hurry up and release the Caradron Overlords, then I'm sure I'll get some of those, and probably get a few painted before the end of the month. If they're not released, then other things I want to work on. As soon as it stops being so windy outside, I want to actually spray my Citadel woods that I've got sitting here at the table, and then I can get on with painting those. They're not going to take very long, so I anticipate they will be done before the end of the month, and maybe, possibly some more Kings of War stuff as well, depending if I buy anything else. I'm eyeing up more purchases as I get more and more into Kings of War and expand my armies, and I've actually been pondering getting another Kings of War army as well. I've already got the Goblins and the Undead, One thing I'm doing with the undead is ordering some new movement trees for them, so that I don't have the do I measure to the model or do I measure to the tray issue during games. So I'm going to try to order some trays that do have a bit of a lip, so that the models don't slide off, but the lip will be factored into the size of the tray, so it'll still be the right size. It just means I'll be able to fit less models on them. Anyway, let me know what you've been painting this month. Let me know what you think of what I've painted. And of course, if you have any questions, drop them in there. And I'll catch you next time, folks. Ta-ta for now.